So I think I've probably seen Lord of the Rings, the extended versions, because they're the only versions in my opinion. I've probably seen them around 10 times, and I'm not being dramatic. I've literally watched them all, I think like it's 12 hours of the extended versions all up. Probably at least 10 times now, and I'll probably watch them at least another 10 times. I am a huge fan. And I even liked the Hobbit movies. You know, I think there was a lot of good things about them. I loved Franduil. I loved how snarky and sarcastic he was, and of course they weren't as good as the original trilogy, but I don't think I went into them expecting them to be. They were just a lighter, fluffier version of Lord of the Rings, and I found them very enjoyable. This, I would say, is a step down from The Hobbit. But look, a lot of people seem to be going into this set against either loving it or hating it for political reasons, and I try not to go into politics on my channel. You know, I'm a Christian, I'm very open about that, I'm not going to ever hide that. But I try not to let that and my political beliefs, you know, sort of change my mind about things. I'm not going to look at something and be like, oh, I don't agree with the politics on that, so I'm set against hating it. No, I went into this show like I go into most things that I watch. Most things, there are a few exceptions, but most things I go into with an open mind, wanting to enjoy it. I don't go into things hate watching them, wanting to just destroy it online or anything like that. And I really, really genuinely wanted to love this show. I wanted to see the lore and mythology expanded upon of my all-time favorite movie, but unfortunately I was disappointed. But having said that, there were still things about this I really did enjoy, but I did have my doubts going into it because of like how they disrespected Peter Jackson by saying they wanted to get him involved in it and then just ghosting him. I mean, if you had brought him in, it could have been so much better. But anyway, I'll leave that there. But I just think that was really disrespectful. But anyway, I think it's disappointing that we had this book full of amazing stories, Silmarillion. I can never say it right, but anyway, we have that book of amazing stories that could have been adapted. And I would have loved to see that. I haven't read the whole book, but what I have read seems to be really amazing. And it just seems weird they have all this rich Tolkien lore that they could have expanded upon. And yeah, I don't know. Anyway, we have what we have. But anyway, the main problem I have with this, one of the problems is that, look, it just doesn't really feel like the same universe as the original trilogy. Like, I've been watching House of the Dragon, and I've been enjoying that if you want to see my reviews. Anyway, the thing about that is it feels like it's the same universe as Game of Thrones. There's that feeling of you can get immersed in it. It's immersive because it feels like it's a continuation of the show that we love, but this doesn't feel like a continuation. It feels like a generic copy-paste teen fantasy show, to be honest. And, you know, I feel like it's just a copy-paste. There's the formula, there's the YA young adult protagonist, Galadriel, which we'll get into a bit more later on. But one thing I've noticed is that even though the original movies are, like 20 years old now, over 20 years old or so, I don't know the exact number, but they're old, and they still hold up so well. They look absolutely incredible. Even now, rewatching it, I'm still impressed. I think a lot of that was that Peter Jackson wanted to like have the orcs in prosthetics and not have it all CGI. And you can see even movies from the 80s that do that. They Sorry, I just had something pop up on screen and it gave me a heart attack. Yeah, the movies from the 80s that have prosthetics, it has aged so well. And it's the same with The Lord of the Rings, the original movies. And then you see the Hobbit trilogy and they used a lot more CGI, and that was a huge complaint about the trilogy. And it feels like it's going in the same direction as this a little bit. Like, I would say they still do have very, very impressive visuals when it comes to just the world building and the set design. That is one thing I'll say I liked about it, but let's start to go into some of the things that I don't like. And the fact that this is supposed to be like the most expensive show ever made. I think the budget was $60 million an episode, where House of the Dragon is $20 million an episode, if I'm right. And honestly, like I said, I think the visuals are impressive, but in today's day and age, it's nothing spectacular. There's nothing that stood out about it. Like, there's some parts where I was like, wow, that looks really good, but still, a lot of movies are on that same level of quality these days and have much less money spent on them. So, and there's parts where it just felt really cheap in general. I'll go into that a bit later with the costumes and that, but it felt like, really? You spent $60 million on this? Anyway, so one thing that stood out to me was the cave troll scene. Not the cave troll, snow troll, whatever it is. And Galadriel just overpowered it so easily as everybody stood back and watched him. Look, I get that she's meant to be one of the most powerful beings in Middle Earth. It's not that I have a problem with her strength, it's the fact that she seems so unemotional and like she was just lacking in any warmth and kindness. Galadriel from the Lord of the Rings trilogy, she seemed to have a lot of warmth and strength at the same time. Like, even Gimli, who was a dwarf, she was very kind to him, even though they've always sort of been enemies, and he came into Lothlorien, you know, saying bad things about her. But still, I just think that maybe her character could be saved if she learnt some humility, because we see her getting rescued by a human as she drowned. So I guess we do get to see her fail in a small way. But overall, it feels like she's been sold to us as one of those characters that is going to be just too perfect. And that doesn't create a compelling character that we can feel invested in. Like, take Eowyn, that wanted to fight in the war but couldn't because she's a woman. That was a storyline that nobody had any problems with. Sorry, I'm getting over the flu. Yeah, nobody had any problems with her. Like, there's no men who were saying, oh, she was powerful and a woman, blah, 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 blah. Like I said, I don't want to get too much into the political stuff any more than I feel like I have to, but it's not so much about her being strong as the way they delivered the message of strength. And they had Eowyn, I'll just go with Eowyn. We see her fail time and time again before we eventually see her succeed. And so seeing her in those moments of vulnerability and weakness allows those moments of strength to shine so much more. Anyway, she just comes off as unlikable, arrogant, and really just like she has no emotions, and she's meant to be younger than she is in the trilogy. So if she can show warmth and compassion in the trilogy, it would seem like it would be the opposite, like she would be more emotional as a younger elf. But anyway, hopefully they work on her character a bit. So then we have Elrond. So, okay, once again, I'm just touching on some political stuff. I don't like to, but it's sort of like something that seems a little hard to not address in part as I talk about his character. So apparently people are saying, multiple people I've seen, that he's meant to be a gay man. And look, there's nothing in the first 2 episodes that would insinuate that. Like, people are saying there's tension between him and other males, and I'm not seeing it. It's like with Legolas and Gimli and Frodo and Sam. It's like we have to take every male friendship these days and make it into something sexual, and it just feels so unnecessary. But anyway, I'm going to leave that right there. So I thought one thing that was a really interesting dynamic was how Elrond goes to see his dwarf friend under the mountain. And I've got to say, one of the things that I was quite impressed with is how they showed us under the mountain, because one thing when I watched the original trilogy I was always thinking is, I wonder how this would look when it's really in its prime, before it got destroyed, and finally getting to see that was really cool. See, I do have some good things to say. I'm not just going to hate on this. There were parts I really genuinely did enjoy, and yeah, I'm definitely going to keep watching. But anyway, so we see him talking to his friend, and his friend is so angry with him because Elrond's missed 20 years of his life. He's missed his marriage, the birth of his 2 children, and he's understandably upset. And Elrond seems a bit like puzzled, like it's been 20 years. And it's like that scene in, I forget which movie it is, one of the Hobbit movies, where Thranduil has the Elven King, the Dwarf King, the soon-to-be King, locked up in, what's the name of the forest that he lives in? Greenwood? I don't know. Anyway, I know it, but isn't it annoying when you know something, but you just can't think of it on the spot? Mirkwood, that's it. So he has him locked up there, and he's like, I can keep you down here for 100 years. 100 years are a blink of an eye in the life of an elf. And it sort of feels like that's a really interesting dynamic, because it seems like elves don't view the flow of time the same way other people do. So Elrond might not be intending to be a bad friend, and he apologizes, and I do like his character much more than Galadriel. I still have issues with him, but not the gay thing, like that's not it. More just the fact that he seems so unlike the Elrond we see in the trilogy. He doesn't seem like the same character, like I said, with the whole universe as a whole. It feels like different characters in a different universe. They don't feel like the younger people in the same universe. So that's the issue I mainly have with Elrond. But yeah, I think it's a really interesting dynamic to see how elves can't really be friends with other people to the extent that they probably want to be, like outside of their race, because they die so much quicker than them. I don't know how long dwarves live for, but elves live for thousands and thousands of years. So getting attached to people who are just going to die would be really heartbreaking. But anyway, so I really enjoyed their time under the mountain and the conversations there. But I just didn't really feel a connection with him as a character. But hopefully as we get to see more of him, I will. Anyway, so I would say the Hobbits, or Half-Feet, or whatever they're called now before they get called Hobbits, that is probably my favourite storyline so far. It's just lighthearted and funny. How they see the falling star, which I'll go into that at the end of my video when I'll talk about my theories a bit more later. But I thought that was really interesting to see how close-minded I'm just going to call them hobbits are. When it comes to people outside of their own race, they just don't really want anything to do with them. And it could be about survival because they're afraid of them, afraid of getting hurt because they're so small. But yeah, I thought that was interesting. One thing I have an issue with is some of the accents. Maybe that's a weird thing to nitpick, but it's not a big thing. It doesn't happen too often. But I did notice the actors slipping out of their accents quite a bit. So to be honest, there were times I was bored and it didn't really feel like it was building up to much. I just didn't really feel like I could connect with anyone in 2 hours except the hobbits, and that's a problem. Like, the fact that I wasn't really interested in any of the characters. Anyway, I feel like also with the elves have always been my favourite part of the Lord of the Rings trilogy, and getting to see their universe, their lore and mythology expanded upon was one of the main things I was excited about going into this. But they don't feel like elves, they don't move like elves, and yes, we haven't had any battle scenes yet, but even in the trilogy, you could see even like Legolas and the other elves just normally would move a certain way. Like, I saw a behind the scenes featurette of The Hobbit, which I think they still have on YouTube, and it shows how they were teaching Lee Pace and Orlando Bloom. And it was interesting because Orlando was actually older than Lee Pace and he played his son. Anyway, so it was interesting seeing how they were being taught to move like elves even just as they walked, and I feel like that's one of the elements that Peter Jackson could have brought into the show, you know, his expertise when it came to these things. They just felt like humans with pointy ears. There was nothing majestic and ethereal and wise about them, and it felt very disjointed. And that was one of the things I meant when I said it didn't feel like the same universe. And it just lacks a sense of heart and soul that the original had. And I really truly believe that that was, and like I said, I'm not going to get into this sort of stuff a lot, so don't worry, but on my channel in general. But yeah, like I said, I'm a Christian, and I love the fact that Tolkien wasn't a Christian, but he was a religious man, and you could feel his religious values infused into the trilogy. There was an underlying subtext of what he believed, good versus evil and stuff, and that's lacking in this. It feels like they're trying to twist the underlying subtext into something that Tolkien never stood for. And I've seen people openly say that this is to fly in the face of Tolkien. And that's where I have to sort of stand up and start talking about political stuff a little bit, even though I don't like to, because it's like you're admitting to flying in the face of the values and what the author stood for that wrote the original books. It's just so disrespectful. And as a huge Tolkien fan, it's hard to be middle of the road like I like to do in most things about this, because like I said, it's my all-time favorite movie. But anyway, so I'm not saying this to try to be awful. Like I said, I went into this show really wanting to like it, but I've got to talk about just the fact that this show is meant to be the most expensive show that Amazon has ever done. Yet at times it felt like a high school production when it came to the costumes. They didn't feel authentic and immersive. Like, take what Aragorn wore in the original trilogy. It felt worn in and appropriate. Like, it reflected his lifestyle, but a lot of these characters had armor that was perfect, and it just didn't really feel like it was worn in at all, which it should have been. It just felt like they were wearing costumes. Like, they obviously are actors wearing costumes, but it shouldn't feel like it. And the acting at times felt a bit like, with the look of the costumes and the bad acting, it felt like it was LARPing, like live action role playing. And I'm not saying that all the actors were like that. There were a lot of good actors, but some of them at times, and maybe this can also be put down to the script, which needed a lot of work, but I don't know, just with the camera angles, also some of the choices they made, it just felt all around like this could be a high school production with a very big budget behind it. And I felt like when I saw Lothlorien and Rivendell for the first time, I was in awe. I was like, wow, I wish I could live there. But when I sort of elven communities in this, I felt like nothing. And I just felt like it was so copy-paste from any other fantasy show. Like, it was visually beautiful, but it wasn't special. There was nothing ethereal about it, you know? Anyway, I just feel like it was just such a disappointment in so many ways. But one thing that I did like was the music. Based on the trailers, I thought it wouldn't be good, but I actually liked the score that we've had so far. The theme of the elves was good. If they had just put in a bit more work, I feel like they could have made it so much better. Anyway, so I can't wait to see Sauron, and I hope that they bring in like some of the other characters that are from the books, like Glorfindel. That would be really cool to see. And I hope that Sauron doesn't actually look like this guy. Who knows? I hope it's not this Walmart version of him that we see that looks like a drugged up Eminem, but we'll just have to wait and see. But I can't wait to see Sauron in his human form. That's one of the things that I am excited about. So one thing I like is the little Easter eggs, the nods to the original. Like with Elrond when he's going to where the dwarves live underground, Moria, and we see him having that speech, doing that speech that Gimli gave to the rest of the Fellowship about how they would be received underground. And it was just like, yeah, I know where that's from. Which it feels like maybe they shouldn't be able to get away with that. It felt like it was a very word for word sort of rip-off, which obviously they meant as a nod to the original, but yeah, I feel like with the copyright laws, I don't know what they did. I don't know what the red tape is around copyright laws, but anyway, so one thing that bugged me, and let me just make myself clear, I have no problem whatsoever with diversity, but what I don't like is that there was already so much diversity in this between elves and men and dwarves, and that was what the focus should be on, about how they all had so much conflict and racism, like we see with the elves and the dwarves, and Gimli and Legolas hating each other straight away and overcoming that racism and these preconceived notions that they had of each other and becoming friends, and adding another layer of diversity on top of that wasn't needed. And let's be honest, Tolkien wrote this as Anglo-Saxon myth, so I'm just going to leave that there. But anyway, moving on, it just feels like it took away from the diversity that was already present in Middle-earth and should have been the focus. But I'm happy that they still did have tensions between like the elves and the men. So to wrap it up, let's talk about some theories I have. So the wizard that fell out of the sky, the falling star guy, could he be Radagast? That would be really cool. I would like to see that character. Or maybe it could be Gandalf, and that explains why he likes hobbits so much, why he's so fond of hobbits. And is this kid the son of that elf? Because we see them say that they don't know who his father, he doesn't know who his father is. It's a mystery. So who knows? But then again, I feel like elves are so wise that they would be able to tell that if they had a kid, well, the original elves would. Maybe this elf just, wouldn't. But anyway, so Galadriel and the shipwreck guy who saved her, it would obviously not last long, but I would like to see maybe a romance between them. Like, we know that long term, for a million reasons, it's not going to play out, but it would be cool to see Galadriel, who might have some racism towards humans, like a lot of elves in Middle-earth seem to do, and it would be a way of her showing some humility to what she thought, her preconceived notions of the world, of what humans are like, about getting her to sort of develop feelings for a human. That could be an interesting story, but I don't think they'll go in that direction, to be honest. So the kid, the possible elves kid, we see him holding Sauron's sword, like Pippin looking into the crystal ball in the original trilogy. So could he start to maybe get influenced by it, possibly? That would be really interesting to see, and maybe the elf will be like, he has to die, but then he finds out that that's his kid. And that could be an interesting dynamic moving forward. But anyway, look, this isn't as good as the original trilogy or even The Hobbit by far, but it still isn't as bad as I went into it expecting it to be. I honestly did enjoy it at times. I was bored a lot of the time too, but there were times that I enjoyed it, and I probably will keep watching it. So I think I will give this a 7 out of 10. So let me know what you thought about it down below. Please be respectful. We're all allowed to have our own opinions. My opinion doesn't take away from your opinion. So if you would like to see more from me, please consider subscribing, liking, hitting the notification bell. Thanks, guys.